Hello everyone. In this video, I will discuss one of the film called Fragile, 2005, and never forget that I always pray for you and your family to be happy and healthy always. The movie opens with the setting of an old hospital called Mercy Falls. A nurse named Susan, who at that time got the night shift, was busy packing a few things because Mercy Falls would soon be closed. Then suddenly came a child patient named Maggie, who appeared to surprise Susan. Maggie walked slowly back to her bed where she and the others were treated. Suddenly, a patient named Simon groaned in pain, indicating something had done harm to him. Simon was immediately taken to another room by Susan, and a doctor named Robert was also there. Susan insisted that there was something strange in the hospital, but no one believed her. Simon's leg bone broke suddenly, and no one could explain the cause. Even suddenly, the leg bone broke again for the second time. A few days later, a woman named Amy starts preparing with her bag because the ship will arrive at its destination. Roy, one of the guards at Mercy Falls, arrived at the dock to pick up Amy. On the way, Roy told Amy that Mercy Falls should have been closed, but was delayed because there was a train accident, so the rooms in other hospitals were full and could not accommodate all the patients from Mercy Falls. Upon arrival at Mercy Falls, Amy was greeted by Folder, the head doctor at the hospital. Amy was immediately taken to the first floor by taking the elevator, where the elevator no longer had the number 2 button. On the first floor, Amy was introduced to another nurse named Helen. Amy was taken around to see some of the remaining pediatric patients at Mercy Falls. In the playroom, Amy met Maggie, who was busy playing with her puzzle blocks, but Maggie herself didn't say much. After that, in the treatment room, Amy met Simon. Helen told her that Simon's leg was broken, but until now, no one knew what caused it. That night, after Helen had finished, it was Amy's turn to be on duty. Amy looked at the children in the room. She saw Maggie, who was still awake. Maggie, who began to sympathize with Amy, then began to tell the story, that the puzzle block she played with earlier in the afternoon was used to talk to Charlotte. Charlotte is a woman who lives on the second floor. Not long after, Amy heard something from the children's playroom. Amy saw no one there. She only found a puzzle block that had been arranged into a word, mine. Suddenly, a loud rumbling sound came from the second floor. Amy ran to the room of children who were scared.
To bed, let's go. I promise it's okay. It was the pipes or something.
No,
I don't know.
it was her. I told you. She's angry.
In the morning, Amy helped Helen prepare Simon to move to a better hospital. Amy herself had met Robert, a doctor at Mercy Falls. With a wheelchair, Simon was escorted by Amy to the ground floor using an elevator. But not yet on the ground floor, the elevator suddenly stopped. Then the elevator moved back up to the second floor, and Amy, who tried to get out, forcibly opened the elevator door. Now Amy could see the second floor that Maggie had told her about as the residence of a woman named Charlotte. In the end, Amy also managed to survive the terrible events that occurred in the elevator, and Simon moved to a new hospital with a helicopter. When night fell, Amy was back on duty. This time she was accompanied by Dr. Robert, who told her a lot about Maggie's condition. After that, Amy was surprised by the presence of Maggie, who was already in her room. Maggie said that it was Charlotte who had hurt Simon, which surprised Amy. Simon's leg bone, which previously only had 1 fracture, now has 2 fractures at once within 1 minute. Robert couldn't explain much because no one knew the cause. Then Amy went to see Susan. She wanted to ask Susan many things, but when she arrived at Susan's house, Amy got the news that the woman had died 1 day ago in an accident. Inevitably, Amy returned home and told Helen the news. Helen did not have the heart to tell Maggie, who was still watching with other patients, especially since she knew Maggie's closeness to Susan before. Until one night, suddenly, something moved on Simon's bed.
Amy.
Why don't you believe me?
I do.
Maggie says she's seen her.
Maggie is a kid.
There was something under that sheet.
Amy, you have got to pull yourself together.
Amy, who was still looking for answers to all the strangeness that happened here, went straight to the house of two shamans where Susan had asked for help. The shaman said that there was something from another world that was now in Mercy Falls. Only people who were close to death could see it. The shaman again said that something was there because they just wanted to be close to their loved ones. Back at the hospital, Amy found Maggie, who was in a special room because of a sudden relapse of her illness. Amy then approached Maggie and again made sure to ask Maggie whether she had really seen Charlotte. That evening, Roy packed up some of the objects in the children's playroom, but the unfortunate incident had to happen when the puzzle block he was about to sort out suddenly moved on its own. As if someone was talking to him, Roy's nose and legs were immediately broken in an instant, which resulted in Roy's death. Since the incident, Amy has begged to get the children out of Mercy Falls immediately, but Mrs. Folder insisted that there was nothing. Then, Amy asked Maggie to show her where Charlotte was. Then Maggie showed her the way to a place where Charlotte was. While throwing away her fears, Amy also walked slowly down the second-floor hallway that she had seen some time ago. Most of the doors were locked from end to end, until the time came when Amy was moved to enter a room where she found a roll of old movies and also an old photo. A photo that read Charlotte and Mandy in 1959. And suddenly, Charlotte was in front of her. Fortunately, that's when Maggie suddenly appeared to invite Amy to run, but without realizing Maggie's favorite blanket had fallen on the second floor. Together with Helen, Amy meets Robert and shows him the photo she took. At first, Robert doesn't believe her, but afterwards he starts to feel very curious. They tried to find files in the same year as the photo, but to no avail. They didn't find a patient named Charlotte. Suddenly, Amy didn't feel desperate. Using the projector, Amy and Robert turned on the film reel she found. From the footage, Amy was very sure that the child was Charlotte, who used to suffer from brittle bone disease, where if you move alone, then the bones in the patient's body will break in an instant, and during the disease, the patient is always treated by a nurse, who Amy thinks is named Mandy.
No, Maggie was telling the truth. She did see her. She wants to make everybody suffer the way she did.
What?
She was there.
Robert also believed when he asked the nurses to prepare the children to leave immediately. Without further ado, Amy herself decided to go straight to Folder's house, and when she saw the look on Amy's face, Folder immediately understood what had happened. On the way, Folder finally revealed everything that she had covered up so far. She explains that in 1959, there was a nurse who never wanted to be separated from her own patients, and because of severe frustration, the nurse was willing to hurt and take the patient's life. Until, in the end, the nurse also followed into the afterlife. In the meantime, Robert managed to find out who the girl really was. Her name turned out to be Mandy. Now Robert knows that the figure he had seen and who Amy was looking for, named Charlotte, is a nurse who used to work at Mercy Falls, and she took care of a patient named Mandy. Not long after Amy arrived, Robert told her everything he had just found out, and concluded that all the strange events that occurred at the hospital were the actions of an angry Charlotte. Because Charlotte did not want the children at Mercy Falls to vacate the building, Amy also remembered the words of the shaman some time ago that sometimes something from the other world stayed, because they wanted to be close to their loved ones. Finally, Amy and Robert ran back to the first floor, where the children were preparing to leave Mercy Falls. Panic broke out on the first floor. Charlotte was getting angry, and she broke the leg of a child. Amy, who came immediately, shouted to Helen not to take the children out of Mercy Falls. Even when the rescue team came, Amy also refused to hand over the children, until suddenly everything stopped. There was no more rumbling inside Mercy Falls. Mrs. Folder also asked where Maggie was, and it turned out that Helen had let Maggie go to get her blanket that was left on the second floor. Amy hurriedly ran to the second floor where Charlotte managed to get Maggie. As loud as possible, Amy shouted, calling Maggie. Maggie forbids Amy from approaching her because Charlotte will be furious. It is clear that Charlotte is getting closer. But luckily, Amy managed to get Maggie back. Unfortunately, during this incident, Amy's leg had to be badly injured, but with the rest of her strength she continued to run and run, while Charlotte, who was getting angry, began to tear down everything in front of her. Amy finally managed to escape, but they fell and were hit by the rubble. In the end, Amy managed to get out of the rubble by carrying Maggie, who was no longer breathing.
Maggie, no. She's dead. Oh, God. She's gone. I saw her. I'm gonna die.
As a result, Dr. Robert is still continuing to try to spur Amy's heart so that she can survive.
A princess needs a kiss to be saved. A love kiss.
Clear, please.
And from that moment on, the scene immediately shows Amy, who has woken up. Robert and the two psychics were also beside her, as was Maggie. But sadly, Maggie that Amy saw was just a shadow, because in fact, Maggie's life had been taken by Charlotte with her. And that's it for the story series of this film. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribe, like and share. See you in the next video. Goodbye.